So in this episode of Cars with Corey, we're going to work on my daily driver 2010 Ford Expedition. We got a whole mess of miles on this thing. Just under 230 actually. We're just a few short. 229,947, so we're about 53 miles short of 230K. Owned this vehicle for a couple of years now. It is a 5.4, so knowing what I know about the timing chain system, I went ahead and installed an aftermarket oil pressure gauge quite a while ago, and been keeping an eye on things. As of recent, we've noticed that oil pressure hot has been down all the way to 13 or 12 psi, which is, as I understand it, is the lowest acceptable limit. We do have some slap by a timing chain when it starts up, and we suddenly developed a phaser knock. So it's time to pull this thing apart, see if we can bring some life back into it. So we'll start it up and see what kind of calamity we can hear from underneath the hood. Actually not bad for once. Typically it's pretty terrible. I don't typically run this low on fuel, on this old of a fuel system and fuel pump, but in this case, I wanted to make the vehicle as light as possible. It's going to be going on the hoist, so down to the shop we go. Well, of course it figures. We're starting it up to maybe take it down for the last time before we tear it apart, and I hear nothing. I hear no timing chain noise, no phaser noise, nothing. Just noisy fuel injectors as is typical. So regardless, we're going to get an assessment. We know there's an issue. So as mentioned on this episode of Cars with Corey, we're working on my daily driver 2010 Ford Expedition. It's currently sitting just barely under 230,000 miles. Got some pretty strange timing noises. The oil pressure that I have a mechanical gauge for is starting to lay down on us. And it's overall time to go in and see what's going on. I imagine we at least have a chain tensioner that is blown out, is not building pressure anymore. I think our phasers are getting pretty worn out as well. When I bought this vehicle a couple of years ago, the status of the timing system was unknown. It sounded good at the time, didn't make any noise, seemed to build good oil pressure, and for the first 30,000 miles, really no issue. I put the mechanical gauge in to kind of keep an eye on it, but it's definitely time. As I may have clipped before this, of course I started it up. We're running 60 psi, of course cold, but no noise from the timing system, nothing like that. But these things don't magically fix themselves, so we're going to tear into it anyway. Let's get started. And here it is, the iconic 5.4 liter. Maybe not so much an icon, but definitely notorious for timing chain issues. 5.4, 4.6 liter 3 valve. Mine has a 2010, which has a lot of the issues fixed, particularly spark plugs. They don't tend to blow themselves out of the cylinder heads and put dents in the hood and things like that. Probably the better. This is the end of the generation. Was discontinued most vehicles other than vans, I think, towards the end here. But a little background on this vehicle: was owned by a bank, was used for several 100-mile day trips back and forth between kind of my local area here. I bought it with, I think, just under 190K. We're up to 230. As my understanding, it was on a maintenance program. Had all the maintenance done needed, fresh oil. Aside from a little rust here and there, just really one door. And we have, surprisingly, only one rocker panel with minimal rust, aside from typical stuff like paint under the aluminum hood bubbling and paint chipping off of the back hatch. In pretty tremendous shape. Haven't done a whole lot to this thing in the time I've owned it. Let's see, roughly 40,000 miles I put on it. Did some normal maintenance stuff here. Did plugs, transmission, flush and fill, all that good stuff, and changed the oil very regularly. And while you don't always believe what you're told on maintenance, On this vehicle, I kind of tend to believe it. The underhood here is extremely clean for 230,000 miles. Everything seems to work, everything goes. All of the power options, this is a limited spec, but all the power options work. Everything basically on this vehicle works. So I've been changing the oil on a regular basis. We're not due for a change here, but as you can see, really no darkness contamination. This is usually how it comes out. I fairly religiously pull apart the oil filters and see if there's any metal in those. Don't typically find any. So we have a couple of checks I'd like to do first before we start really tearing into this thing. There's a lot of components in the way and a lot of things we have to take off, take apart. One of the first things is to make sure that the thrust bearing on the crankshaft is not wiped out. We do that with a pry bar down underneath. So I will see you down there shortly. So down underneath the vehicle here, get this as best as I can for everyone. Got our pry bar on the back of the crankshaft. We'll give it a little nudge and seems to be tight. There is a slight bit of movement, nothing major, but it does not pop in, pop out. There is a tiny bit of flex to it, which would be considered normal. A couple of thousandths on the thrust bearing. It needs a little room to wiggle. So we're going to go ahead and proceed with the timing set, or the timing job, since we're sure, at least for a quick diagnostic, that the bottom end of this engine is seemingly okay. So back up top here, since this is not intended to be an all-inclusive step-by-step video of the repair itself, I'm going to start tearing in, obviously starting with the intake related parts, lots of wire harnesses and things like that to get out of the way. So we can get the valve covers off. We'll have to pull the front accessory drive off the engine. Not everything, but particularly pulleys, things like that. Water pump pulley down there and idler pulleys, tensioner down here. Eventually, obviously also pulling off the harmonic balancer itself. My Expedition doesn't have a clutch fan, it has an electric fan, so that gives us a whole lot more room here. As a matter of fact, as the years went on and the engineering changed, I think they knew that techs were going to have to be doing this. They moved a lot of things over the years. They moved the air conditioning lines sort of out of the way. The battery used to be kind of here in the middle, now it's up front here where it's more out of the way. Got more wire harnesses here, but of all the generations of the 5.4 3-valve, I think it was 2008, 2009, don't quote me on that, but that era they made the last level of improvements before discontinuing, changed the spark plugs and moved a lot of the underhood configuration around. This will be similar to an F150, but not the same. Actually, another thing they moved the ECE, PCM, ECM, ECU, BCM, whatever it is, the control module there. That used to be kind of more right in this area. They moved it over here completely out of the way. So there's a lot less things to move out of the way to get the valve covers off and the front cover off, things like that. I'm not sure if we're going to have to drain the coolant on this. We definitely won't have to discharge the AC, which is great news. We can just leave that the way it is, but I'm going to go ahead and tear into it. If there's any snags or warnings or helpful tips and tricks that I come across along the way, I'll stop and update everyone, but we'll start simply with pulling a lot of the stuff out of the way, which is really the hardest part of this job. Once you get at the timing chains, if you're competent enough at least to get them aligned properly, which they make pretty easy with discolored links on the chain and marks on the timing sprockets and things and phasers themselves. It's actually pretty easy, but what takes forever is taking all this stuff out of the way and putting it all back when you're done. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here. I'll pick it up if there's anything worth stopping and commenting on. Well, that didn't take long. I was literally amazed at how much of the air box or the air intake pipe, how much room that thing was like taking up and space it was covering. Like I said, it's actually kind of sad really that they made so much space to do this job again with the electric fans instead of a clutch fan, because clutch fan, while not impossible, just kind of gets in the way. No shroud, nothing like that. This job's turned out to be quite a bit easier to take apart, I guess, than I imagined. And like I said, I imagine that has quite a bit to do with the fact that over time, this timing service job, I imagine they knew was going to be an issue, and they made it to where, essentially engineered things so it was easier to take apart and easier and faster to do this job. So Coolant lines notorious for leaking. I did have to repair mine. I got a brass T in there. I think what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to unhook it here at the top of the block here, and I'm just going to pull this stuff out of the way and hope and pray that those things don't leak after the fact. They have a tendency to. I've already changed plugs on this and diagnosed a couple coils and some other things too, so I've already yanked around on them quite a bit as it is, but that's ultimately why this guy had to be replaced here. Try to be as careful as I can, but you know, honestly, there's quite a bit of room in here compared to what I thought I was getting into watching some videos, kind of like the one I'm about to make here, kind of on this job and how it goes. And it seemed like the other ones were quite a bit more cluttered, whereas at least for my stake, the 2010 Expedition, there's lots of room in here. So honestly, when it comes to taking stuff apart, it's probably going to take me half the time that it does some of the early 3 valves. Compared to this one, especially the F150. I think the F150 is a little more crammed in here, just a few more things in the way, but we'll be back with possibly some other updates on how to take stuff apart or stuff that didn't come apart easy or some tricks I found along the way. Okay, well, it's been a couple of days. As we can see, we got quite a bit farther. I've got the engine pretty much ready to get down to where we can see the timing set, hit a setback with that. I'll come back to that briefly here. I did get the wire harnesses off, ended up taking the intake, the inlet air pipe out of the way. Did get creative in a couple of spots. The wire harness for the injectors and everything else on the driver's side of the engine. This one goes all the way down to the oil pressure sensor down there by the oil filter. It's impossible to get in there, so instead of pulling that loose and pulling this whole wire harness up, I chose to just tie it up. This stuff's amazing, by the way. This is called, what is it called? Hunting wire. Imagine if you're in a tree stand or something, you can wire around a tree. I use it all the time to pull stuff out of the way, so I've got the vacuum tube for the brake booster here. That's tied up. I got this wire harness tied up. Stuff works great. As far as things that I've learned so far, I did end up leaving the cooling system. I did not drain that. I'm going to have to deal with this hose in my way, but on the 2010 Expedition, this job is quite a bit easier than a lot of the F150s and the earlier ones. Mostly because you don't have a fan in the way. This one has electric fans, got all kinds of room up here, so that's been certainly helping me along the way. Couple of things that I've learned: don't need to unplug everything from the passenger side, but I did unplug 2 of the ECM harnesses. I believe there are 2 connectors. Yeah, these 2 right here that I disconnected and got that harness over there. Again, like I said, I was able to leave these heater hoses all intact here. It was a real bear to pry that valve cover out of there, but it did come out. I was a little more patient. Might have been a little easier. I had to try, essentially, I was being very, very careful with the VCT sensor. I didn't want to break that off. So we have the valve covers off. I got the cams covered right now. Giving them a quick inspection so far. They're actually pretty decent. I've felt across, drug a fingernail across every single one of the lobes, and sure they show some wear, but to be expected with an engine that has nearly 230,000 miles. So I believe the cams are going to be okay. Before I pulled the front cover, I was going to pull all the followers, but I decided to go ahead with the front cover anyway. Another lesson I learned: the transmission lines that are pinned to the front of the engine via a stud down here. There's a bracket, this guy right here. Mine was seized up. You can see down there where it is slid now. I had to really wiggle it to get it to come loose and come off the stud that's in the block here. So I was able to get that out. Another lesson learned was the power steering pump. He's just kind of laying off to the side over there now, but there are 3 bolts that hold him in, 10mm head. It's not impossible to get off, guys, but it is challenging. So another lesson I found too, As I'm pulling the front cover apart, sorry, don't get motion sickness, guys. There is a bolt down here in the center. I just about missed him, but I happened to catch him real quick. And where I'm stalled right now is the fact that this harmonic balancer has no threaded holes in it. So I believe takes a special type of ratcheting harmonic balancer puller, which I do not own. So that's where we are right now. Next time I see you guys, we'll have the timing set opened up. Well, update back on the Expedition. We've got the front cover off. I do have the roller followers out of the driver's side, which was quite a pain. I did make a discovery that my old school balancer puller would not work. You see down there my 32mm socket to turn the crank as we remove the followers. Let me show you the tools I had to pick up. Pretty standard and customary. This is just your standard Amazon Triton engine timing kit. It works. I did have to clearance the valve spring compressor. I'll show you that here coming up in a second. This is the harmonic balancer puller, the rod type that I had to buy. The balancer itself actually had no threaded holes, and then I got an extended axle nut socket set. I've been using standard ones, but I didn't really have a 32mm size and equivalent in standard. I only went up to 1.25 inches, so got those. Those are kind of the basic tools, but as I said here, the balancer itself actually had no threaded holes, so to go with that balancer puller. Like I said, I do have driver's side roller followers out so far. Pro tip, pull the exhaust ones first. They come right out the bottom. I did it the other way. I did all the intakes first, and unfortunately they were a real pain with the exhaust followers in the way. So here is the tool. OTC makes a great one. This is the Amazon $40 one. I ended up having to clearance it, grind it here on the side a little bit. That was to get the very first roller follower out right here in the front. Not hardly any room here, very, very tight. So didn't take much grinding, maybe like 5/1000ths or so at the most, but got all the roller followers out. Engine is not actually too bad, pretty clean for 230,000 miles. We have determined definitely that the timing chain tensioner on this side has failed. I'll be quiet here. Should hear oil squeezing out, and it's basically leaking. On this side here, see if we can hear it. Well, it's pretty tight from me rolling it over, but definitely timing chain tensioner on the driver's side has failed. So we're going to go ahead and continue on with this timing set. Replacing the timing set, I'm going to replace the VCT solenoids while I'm at it. Roller followers look good so far, cams look good, everything looks good there. I'll check those all with a plastic gauge, but we'll be back as we progress through this installation. So we've got the original timing set off. I did confirm it's original to the vehicle, has date codes of 09, so just under 230K on it. Got the phasers installed, which was pretty easy using the provided tool in the Amazon kit. Did go ahead and install new VCT solenoids on both sides. Maybe not necessarily, the other ones were working fine, but I was already in here and they were cheap enough. So next we're going to go ahead and pull off the oil pump. We'll pull the two 8mm bolts off of the pickup tube. 3 bolts, I believe, in the front of the oil pump down there, and slide in the new milling high volume, high pressure pump. So, so far, what we figured out here, driver's side, we definitely had a failed tensioner. The seal on this guy was blown out. It's not even hardly attached anymore. We knew this one was the issue, so other than that, I haven't really found anything damaged necessarily. I will probably line up the timing chains versus the new ones, see if they're stretched. I really think, although this one here has a seal that's loose, it wasn't actually blown out. It's just it's loose from the housing here. So typically, I think you'll see the seal is blown out completely, whereas this one might have just got pulled loose as it came apart. But regardless, we know we weren't getting proper oil pressure to keep tension on the driver's side chain. So all right, got the new timing set installed here. As we can see, the markers on the chains. The dark links are spanning the L. Did install new VCT solenoids. Same on the passenger side here, spanning the R with the links there. Something I did not realize is these tensioners are actually marked R and L. Fortunately, I got the right ones on the right sides, but we got all new guides. We have new bottom sprocket. Trigger wheel has been cleaned up, put back in. New guides on this side. Both tensioners are in, and torqued to 216 inch-pounds. The tensioner guides, the straight ones that are not on the tensioner, torqued to 89 inch-pounds. And actually have our new Melling high volume, high pressure oil pump in. I'll get down below and show you that. So here we can see the new Melling high volume oil pump. Has 3 bolts, one here, one behind the tensioner you can't see, one there. There are 2 on the pickup tube. This one's relatively easy to get. This one down here is a real challenge. Not impossible to get out, but very challenging. I took a rag and made a dam down in there so I couldn't drop the bolt down in the oil pan. Getting them out is not difficult. I probably fought this one for 30-40 minutes, try to get it in. A ratchet wrench that swivels on the end with the smallest head you can find. I actually bought one as an Amazon Basics one, ironically, but it had a teeny tiny little head on it, so there's lots of extra room. I got really big hands and it was really difficult to get that in and out of there, but we do now have our Melling high volume oil pump installed. A couple of other views too of the timing chain guides, timing chains, cam phasers. Did go ahead and replace the phasers while I was in here. There were no signs of issues with the ones that were on the vehicle, but while we're in here we may as well replace them so we don't have to do it again later. Timing sets in, roller followers are all in. They went in a lot easier than they came out, knowing that it's much easier to do the intakes without the exhaust follower in the way. So I put all 8 of the intakes in, and then the 4 exhausts to follow, and then flip-flop back and forth. So we are basically ready. Got the front cover cleaned up. Got a new seal put in it. Got it all ready to prepped and ready to bolt on. So bolt on that front cover. Put the spark plugs back in. Valve covers back on. Plug in all the wire harnesses, and we'll go ahead and prime it. The last thing we'll do is plug in the crank sensor. Without the crank sensor plugged in, it will crank, but it will not fire. So we'll let it build oil pressure. I got a mechanical gauge so I can see it building oil pressure. Once it's built oil pressure, go ahead and plug in the crank sensor and bring this 2010 Expedition back to life. The front cover is on. I believe there are 15 bolts in it. There is a torque sequence to put these on so they do not crack. I definitely recommend using extra care when putting the front cover on. I found that putting the large bolts with the studs sticking out, the 2 on the bottom down there, putting those on first and giving it a light tap, very light, with a dead blow, kind of where in the pin area, which is just above those by the first bolts above them. There's some locating pins. A couple of light taps after I had started the large studs on the bottom down there really made this slide right into place. So torque sequence, 2-stage torque sequence on this one here. And front cover is on, so roller followers in again. We're going to go ahead and put the balancer on. Got the bottom bolts back into the oil pan after the cover is on and torqued. So I did get the lines hooked up over on this side here to that lower stud down there. Got that all straightened out and got those back in there. So after that, we'll go over to the power steering pump, get that done after we get the balancer on, and then we'll be ready to start working up top here. As we can see, skipped about 1,000 steps forward, got both valve covers on, wire harnesses routed, ECU hooked back up. We've got the front accessory drive on. Everything is in order with the exception of the crank sensor that is still unplugged. Reason for that being, we're gonna crank the engine over with the sensor unplugged so it won't fire, build some oil pressure. Like I said, I have a mechanical gauge in this vehicle, so we'll be able to watch it build oil pressure. So pretty much wrapped up under here. We'll give it a start, make sure everything's functioning, no timing noise, and change the oil, and we'll be done. Okay, we got everything buttoned up. It's time to crank the engine and see if we build some oil pressure. Alright, got her up to 60. Took a little longer than I thought it would, but that's why we leave the crank sensor unhooked. So let's go ahead and try to crank it up a little more, see if we can build some more once again. Alright, we're definitely building oil pressure. Let's go ahead and plug it in and it's not happy, it's not seeing oil pressure. Actually, it's not that, it's actually the ignition. So we're going to go ahead and fire it up. Okay, it is the moment of truth. Let's see what happens. There she goes. See what it sounds like. Aside from the exhaust leak and the noisy lifters, this thing has never sounded this good. It sounds fantastic. No more timing chain slap at startup. No more timing noise whatsoever. Running, idling. See, I forgot to hook something up there. A PCB tube, but it's running. So it can be done with a 2010 Expedition. You do not need to unhook the cooling system. Ultimately, you know, it was kind of in the way, but it wasn't bad. The worst part was the valve cover here. So it's up and running. It's fixed. Took me way too long to do. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Cars with Corey. Please like, share, subscribe for more content.